Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Tonight we begin by examining the proposition that India plans to stage manage a conflict with Pakistan. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi called out India during his visit to the UAE. This was followed by a tweet thread from Dr. Moeed Yusuf, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on National Security and Chairman Strategic Policy Planning. The same day, Indian occupation forces opened fire at a United Nations jeep in Azad Kashmir carrying officers from the UN Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan. The jeep had clear UN markings and the UN flag. Mr. Qureshi also contended that Pakistan had credible intelligence of Indian intentions. Since no one outside the government is privy to the nature of such intel, how it was gathered, analyzed and determined, one can't really analyze that statement. The other assertion that India intends to go for a strike because Narendra Modi's government is under pressure belongs in what in international relations literature is referred to as the diversionary hypothesis. Kenneth Waltz, in discussing the causes of war, put out three levels of analysis or images: individuals, domestic makeup of states, and the nature of the international system. So the diversionary hypothesis is the second image theory. Literature on diversion as a cause of war has thrown up mixed results. This again is something we cannot go into any detail because we cannot determine any clear causality here. My intention, therefore, is to have a panel of military experts and ask them about India's military capabilities. What exactly, if India indeed wants a short conflict, can it do? What purpose would it serve given Pakistan's retaliation? What is our state of preparedness, etc.? More broadly, I would like to know what the panel thinks of the significance of Indian Army Chief's six-day visit to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So let's dive right into this. I'm joined by Lieutenant General Waheed Arshad, the former Chief of General Staff of Pakistan Army, and Air Vice Marshal Shahzad Chaudhary, a former fighter pilot and former High Commissioner to Sri Lanka. Let me begin with General Arshad here. General Arshad, what exactly can India do? And I ask this question because the 2016 so-called surgical strikes, which we said were fire raids, and the 2019 attempt to bomb a seminary in Balakot, and then, of course, the retaliation. So the shallow ground incursion didn't really work. The aerial platform didn't really work. So what exactly are we looking at?
Well, Ijaz, it's getting a bit tiring listening to periodic sort of announcements of Indian false flag intentions and then carrying out strikes. One can't really understand, because what are the Indians going to achieve out of these surgical strikes if they want to carry out? If they want to carry out a false flag, false flag has lost its charm because it's been happening so many times and it's getting too predictable that there is some internal issues in India and they want to divert attention and they want to, carry out surgical strike, and then what? We already had this 216 example, we had this 219, they had a bloody nose, and what did they achieve really? So I'm not sure whether they're going to do it, because they tried it on land, they tried it with the Air Force, they might try it in the sea sometimes. But I think what is more important is that we need to understand that obviously when such a strike takes place, or if there are false flags like Pulwama, which result into a strike, obviously they'll have reactions like it happened after Pulwama. And so what are the political objectives of the Indian government? That is more important to understand. They have the capability of surgical strikes, obviously. They have the capability of going to war. They have the capability of a limited war. They have all kinds of capabilities like we do. But what is more important? What political objectives do they want to achieve? Are they going to divert attention from their internal issues just by carrying out a false flag and then resulting into a surgical strike, and then what? It'll have a reaction. So it's a very strange sort of a situation that there's one country, Pakistan, which is crying hoarse that Indians are likely, obviously they must have had some information, some signals, some chatter going on. But I'm also surprised that why would Indians again attempt to do it and again get a bloody nose? Obviously, because it wins a very, very strong reaction from Pakistan.
Precisely. I'm happy that you pointed this out because one of the most important objectives of any kind of use of force is to have some kind of political objective. I mean, it's not use of force in and of itself means nothing. So let me pull in AVM Shahzad Chaudhary here. AVM Chaudhary, your impression of the fact that, you know, it's actually one of the criticisms, and I talked about it yesterday also in my program. I was talking to Dr. Waheed Yusuf, and the criticism is that, you know, we've been saying this for a while in the last year, and nothing has happened. So is this something that the world would begin to take less seriously? How exactly do you read this?
One, I think I fully agree with what General Waheed Arshad just said. War has to have a purpose. It must have a political purpose. And in the current scenario, I don't see any political purpose being served for the Indian political establishment, other than a very, very minor domestic diversion, which could be because of the farmers. But that's hardly a state when any nation will go to war. There's got to be a bigger purpose for it, and I don't see any bigger purpose for it, number one. Number two is a matter of capacities and capabilities. Yes, certain ways capacities are there, but then is war now only restricted to the domains that we have known them to be, for example, the kinetic and the conventional, or have we gone on to the unconventional and the far more exotic cybernetics kind of implementation and tools? So whatever purpose you were required or you wanted to achieve out of a war, in the former times possibly is now achievable, and similar set of targets can be achieved by using a lot more sophisticated and other means which are available to nations. We recently heard about a cyber attack within the US of certain organizations, so we've known that. As far as the Pakistani position is concerned, I agree with Waheed that I really don't find any purpose to saying this again and again. If there is a situation that emerges whereby India feels that it must resort to something that it did in February of the last year, for example, well, Pakistan has a task at hand in terms of responding to it. I mean, it's a good idea to let the world know about it, let the world know about the dangers that perhaps cast a shadow over the South Asia. But really, at the end of the day, you got to fight it out and give a due response to what comes from the other side. So saying it again and again actually seems to mean that either you're not ready, you're too scared, you're not fully prepared for it, or you're expecting something too big from the other side. For the too big, I don't find a reason or a purpose or a cause. Right. For the smaller things, I think there's enough within your own capacity to be able to respond to that.
Right. I also to get your opinion, expert opinion, on the aerial round that was played last year. Now, obviously, the fact that a MiG was downed is something that people focused on. But the Indian Air Force, being a professional Air Force, realized that it wasn't just about downing a MiG. The more worrisome aspect for them of that encounter was a complete comm dominance and electronic dominance by the Pakistan Air Force. So I'm assuming that they would have taken note of this, and they would now be working rather feverishly to develop their sort of training procedures and also the countermeasures.
Yeah, true. I mean, that's very obvious. There were certain gaps in the way that the Indian Air Force engaged itself with the Pakistani Air Force. Very obvious to people like us, let's say, who've been involved and have been the practitioners of this kind of warfare. So there were clearly areas that the Indian Air Force would be worried about. Now you remember how fondly they began to fall back on the Rafale, and therefore whatever the Rafale would bring to them in terms of capacity and ability. More than the tools of war, which are equally important, is the fact that you have a vision of war. And then for that vision, for that specific vision, do you have the right kind of tools? And then how to apply those tools in your own way, and that is what is called strategy, so that you can garner or gain benefit out of any situation. I think accumulation of such events or skirmishes together over a period of days becomes a war. So I think there's a way of looking at war, and in terms of how to prepare for it. War preparedness, war readiness is something that we all talk about. We may not always be 100% true in saying that we are all war ready, but more or less and less the gaps that exist, the better you'll perform on any given day. I think that's what the militaries must look at. There is a need, however, to understand, and I'll re-emphasize the point. And let me actually build on your last. I think it was last week. Your write-up in the Friday Times, and trying to explain to the world how war has changed in terms of its implication, not only in the terms of electronic warfare, in terms of domination of the electronic spectrum, but in terms of using tools of war which are now far, far ahead and far more quieter and subtle than the weapons and the bombs and the aeroplanes. And I think that's where any nation that marches far ahead or further ahead on that is obviously going to have the domination of the conflict. So I think that's an area, and the conflict will go on along with the peace. So it's a different kind of a war and a different nature of war that we are into. I think that's an area that Pakistan especially, and perhaps others also, must begin to look at.
Right. I must thank you for reading the article and also mentioning it. But this is a very important point, General Arshad sir. The fact is that we constantly talk about hybrid war, fifth-gen war, and as AVM Chaudhary mentioned, there are non-kinetic ways of waging war. And you don't have to declare it. I mean, this is something which is constantly happening, even as you and I are speaking. So, and it seems to me that in many ways, this kind of war can be far more useful to the adversary than an actual clash of arms.
Yes, Ajaz, I fully agree with AVM Shahzad. I think he's made some very important observations and points because I think we are already deep into that war. And I'll just quote you 4 sort of instances. You have this hot line of control, so it keeps you under pressure all the time. You suffer casualties. The other side is also suffering casualties. You have this covert application of covert capability inside your country. And we are on record in saying that Indians are behind a lot of these activities. We have the cyber attacks, and we had examples in the recent past about those cyber attacks. We have this, you must have noticed that this EU report on using various NGOs and social media and influencing global and regional opinion about Pakistan's position as a country in terms of financial support, in terms of political support, in terms of economic support, basically to downgrade and undermine Pakistan's disinfo lab. So I mean, these 4 segments of a so-called hybrid war are already taking place and for quite some time. So really, AVM Shahzad makes a very good point. The nature of war has changed. Yes, there is kinetic employment, and both sides obviously are ready for it. But then, if you are achieving your purpose, political purpose of undermining a country, then this is the way to go. I mean, why would the Indians really go into a larger kinetic application and get beaten up probably, inshallah, and lose all what they are subjecting Pakistan to?
Absolutely. Now, General Arshad, I mean, you were the CGS, and that's one of the most important appointments, short of being the Chief of the Army Staff. So plans and, logistics and a number of other things. So at the line of actual control, India is now spending a lot of money and is under pressure to build a military ecosystem. So do you think that also would impede, even if they wanted to, for instance, have some kind of shallow incursion? And I'm saying, okay, let's assume that there is this thought. Wouldn't it become extremely difficult for them to do this while they are building a military ecosystem at the line of actual control, which is very long?
Well, yes. I mean, Indians are building that capability. There's no doubt about that. I mean, they are carrying out a lot of deployments both in terms of the Air Force capability as well as the land forces for the line of actual control with the Chinese. They also have capability along the line of control against us. So what is going to happen is that if they are, they can still carry out shallow incursions and shallow attacks, take hold of some territory. But the key point is that they can do that while building up that capability along the line of actual contact. But then obviously it will result into a reaction. So if you gain some territory, you gain some advantage, you lose some advantage, you lose some territory. So where it is going to end? The key remains in sort of escalation control, like in Pulwama, we took away the escalation control from the Indians. So it all boils down to what are you going to do? Can you control the implications of what the actions you've taken? Can you retain the control of operations, whether tactical or at the operation level? That is the key to the current nature of conflict we have with the Indians.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lieutenant General Waheed Arshad, speaking with us. Let me go back to AVM Shahzad Chaudhary. AVM Chaudhary, last year, around August, September, the Pakistan Air Force has also set up an artificial intelligence setup. Give us some sense of, why it was considered so significant, and how the PF basically wants to turn it into a center of excellence.
I think the essence of it lies in the fact and the realization that the war, like we were saying earlier, the nature of war has changed. And even in the application of an instrument, the greater the information, the greater the tools of war, which are different electronic in nature, are honed and are integrated enough to be able to give you a complete picture and then to be able to locate your targets with efficiency and then be able to bring to bear upon them the effect of your force in whatever form. Now, this is where I want to go back to something that we were discussing earlier, and if you those who follow war very closely would know the Warden's five-ring model. Now, earlier, you have leadership and you have systems and infrastructure, forces and so on. Now, most of those are meant to basically force your adversary into paralysis. And what you needed to do was to be able to attack those in parallel with your physical forces in terms of aeroplanes, bombs, whatever kind of war tool that you had. You can do exactly the same thing without going to war by now the most modern means of cyber warfare. Earlier, if cyber warfare actually forced you into a defensive mode only, where you built firewalls and you made sure the enemy was unable to interfere with your own command and control system. Now you use it as an offensive tool. It has become a tool of offensive war. And so to be able to make an ingress, attack those nodal points where the command and control and the leadership will be paralyzed entirely, even if the forces are still intact, even if the infrastructure is still intact, is more than half the war won. Now, those are the kind of things that I think services and militaries now need to go on to. And I think what the Air Force has started is step one in that direction. Clearly, we will have support of our own research and, of course, of other nations in that. And the more we contribute, the more we sort of cooperate with each other, the faster we will be on the track of ensuring that we have that kind of availability. Also keep in mind that there's an element of space which is gradually creeping into the air domain. How effectively it can be utilized, how effectively it can be really built upon is dependent on the capacity of nations to provide funds for that kind of work. But no nation as yet has been able to place weapons in space. Will that happen in the future? We'll have to wait. But I think that's an area that you can sort of merge along and say, this is where the future wars are going to head.
Right. Stay with me, Chaudhary. I'm going to get back to you with one more question with reference to air war, but I'm also joined by Dr. Naeem Salik, a former brigadier and director, arms control and disarmament affairs at the Strategic Plans Division. Brigadier Salik, thank you so much for being on the program. We were discussing because the foreign minister talked about credible intelligence of some kind of false flag followed by some kind of surgical strike. And, this is not the first time that it's been said. So we're just trying to figure out because something like this needs to have a political objective. What exactly could India gain from this? And let me also add, and we mentioned this before you joined us, that they tried a so-called surgical strike, shallow ground incursion in 2016, then they tried the aerial round in 2019. It didn't come to much. And as a matter of fact, the February 27th humiliation was, something that the Indian Air Force faced. So as an officer, as a military officer who understands these things, tell us, what could they possibly do and what could they possibly gain given Pakistan's certain retaliation?
Thank you, Jaz. Actually, the problem is that you cannot continue to repeat same formula again and again. As Einstein said that if you repeat a process 100 times, you are going to get the same results. So it's no use to doing the same thing again once you have failed to achieve any objectives the first time around. They tried as you mentioned, the land incursion, then the air. Now they have made things difficult for themselves, because now they cannot continue to repeat the same thing, because they have to come up with a new idea. But for what purpose? At that time, the background was the Indian national elections, and they wanted to show themselves, the dispensation in India, led by Mr. Modi, that they are the muscular government, and they will react as they had made known that they will take revenge of what happened at Pulwama. So they got some political dividends, although whatever they wanted to achieve was nullified more or less by Pakistan's counter-action. But somehow their media was able to play it up in a way that it did not get any discredit for the Vajpayee government. He still managed to win a much larger majority than before. But now I think the only political purpose they could have by this kind of an action is that they want to divert their attention from the embarrassment they have faced vis-a-vis China in Ladakh. So it is just to turn the attention away from there, the criticism which has come on India's performance in Ladakh against China. But will that serve the purpose? Because the problem is that if Pakistan retaliates the way it retaliated the last time around, and instead of making some gains, their losses are more than what they gain out of it, such kind of an adventurism, then it will be counterproductive for them. So it's a very risky option for them if they try it, because they will have to think, I think, many times, given their experience of the last year, if they have really learned the right kind of lessons from the experience of February 2019.
Right. Now, and it's great because you're a former artillery officer also, so you're best suited to respond to this. Some of the analyses that have come out, and not directly with reference to Pakistan, but there's always an indirect sort of reference or implication. So they had these long range, about 45-kilometer range MBRLs, what they call the Pinaka Mark 1s, and they've tested the longer version, which is about 75 kilometers, and every launcher has 12 tubes. So 72 rockets in less than a minute, you're firing one particular battery. And there's a sense that, because the CEP is about 10 meters, so they're pretty accurate. So the thinking is that without really committing troops on the ground or using aerial platforms, this is something that, if you got the coordinates, as they keep talking about so-called terrorist camps, that they could use that. But then too, if that happens, there's going to be retaliation. For instance, we could retaliate with A-100s, or maybe we could just up the ante. So give me your sense of that.
There is always this element of counter-bombardment. The artillery always plans counter-bombardment against the hostile artillery, and if they are within your range, you will try to hit them. So they have multi-barrel rocket launchers. We also have a system, similar system with a 120 kilometer range. So it is, if they attempt this, Pakistan has the capability to retaliate in kind. For the recent indigenous system which they have introduced, 155 millimeter with 48 kilometer range, as they have claimed it to be, it gives you much more greater flexibility in operations because you can deploy these weapon systems at one place and they can cover much larger chunk of the frontage while staying at one deployed position. They don't have to be moved around very frequently. But in case of this kind of an attack against alleged terrorist training camp where the actual operations are not going on, you can even afford to bring your artillery guns much closer to the border because you are not fearing the retaliation from the other side immediately. You can fire a salvo or two and then pull back. But this will just have a nuisance value. It is not going to give them much. And then the retaliation is unpredictable because then you cannot force Pakistan to retaliate with the similar kind of systems. Pakistan has then all the options open to retaliate with whatever means it feels are more suitable and which can get the desired results. So Pakistan's options would be open to retaliate, whether the Pakistan uses artillery or long-range rocket launchers or any other weapon system, cruise missiles or ballistic missile or aerial platforms or whatever. So then you cannot predict the kind of response you are going to get. So
right.
These are all, nothing is risk-free.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole point, that what exactly are they going to get out of this? But thank you so much. That was Brigadier Naeem Salik speaking with us. Before I wrap up, let me go back to, as I said, AVM Shahzad Chaudhary. AVM Chaudhary, there's also a sense that, you recall after that February 27 round, their outgone air chief also talked about Rafales. The Prime Minister talked about Rafales. So in the next coming year, end of 2021, I think they'll have all the Rafales that they're planning to get. How much does that enhance their aerial capability given our existing platforms?
Jazz, as you know, I mean, it's a significant addition to their capacity and abilities. Rafale is not a insignificant addition or a weapon platform. It has a good weapon arsenal attached to it, and it has effective radars and electronics. And I think that's it is a modern aircraft fighter aircraft. It is a 4.5 generation, better than 4th generation aeroplanes. So does Pakistan have anything equivalent? Yes, surely we do, in terms of the F-16 Block 52s, and obviously modified to our own needs and requirements, as well as added with the weapons that we need, and we need for a kind of an aerial warfare that is likely to happen between the two countries. Now, that said, like we've been saying before, it is in fact in terms of envisioning how to use what you have and how well are they integrated into the entire system. It doesn't really come out as one weapon system against the other. It is a cumulative effect of the integrated war machine that you have. Now, how effectively are you able to convert your force into a war machine and then be able to synergize them into an application which will bring about an effect which will actually multiply the individual or the cumulative addition of each platform. I think that's the kind of application policy or formula that works in the air. In fact, anywhere on the ground, in the air, or on the seas. So it is to be seen, but there is no reason for us to disrespect what Indian Air Force has, what Indian Air Force can be capable of, and of course in terms of their professionalism. So I don't discount any of what Indian Air Force can put up, but then again, at the same time, I have great amount of confidence in how we have envisioned war, how we have tooled for it, how we have honed it, and how we have integrated it into an effective machine. So I think Hopefully, it will not be that state, but if it does, I think we'll have a reasonable chance of bringing to effect what we possess. So that's a reassuring and a good thing to have. But keep working. We need to keep working towards bringing about ideas and strategies to make sure that we can always be ahead of the curve in terms of aerial warfare.
Absolutely. No room for complacency at all. Thank you so much. That was Air Vice Marshal Shahzad Chaudhary speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to discuss the sentencing by a German court of an Indian on charges of spying. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Time for our second story tonight. A court in Frankfurt has sentenced an Indian national to a year in prison and fined him 2,400 euros after finding him guilty of spying on fellow Indians in Germany. According to the German court, the convict had been tasked with gathering intelligence by Indian intelligence officers based in the Indian consulate in Frankfurt. This is the fourth conviction by German courts of Indian spies in 6 years. The operations were carried out at the behest of Indian intelligence. The court convicted Balveer S, and it's S because German laws do not allow complete naming of the convicts. So Balveer S was convicted of gathering information on Sikh and Kashmiri communities in Germany and passing it on to officers at India's Frankfurt consulate. 3 others, including 2 Indians and 1 Sri Lanka-born fellow, in previous years have been convicted on similar charges. In all cases, the Indian consulate in Frankfurt was involved. To discuss India's intelligence gathering activities, I'm joined by Ali Sultan, who's a lawyer and international law expert, also teaches at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. And I have with me Ambassador Asif Durrani, a former diplomat with a long career in diplomacy. Let me begin with Ambassador Durrani here. Ambassador Durrani, obviously, even in friendly countries, a little bit of this is done by everyone. But in this particular case, do you think there's something which the German courts thought was to be taken cognizance of under German laws? And so, as I said, this is the 4th sentencing of an Indian national in the past 6 years.
You're right. I think it should be a tribute to the German prosecution, actually, which could actually prove the case, because normally what we see in such cases is that prosecution sometimes, they fumble and the case is thrown out of the court. So in that case, I think German intelligence or their authorities, they would have come up with foolproof evidence to show that how Indian intelligence agencies have been involved in actually, keeping an eye on the people or involving. And this is not something new. Indians have been doing that elsewhere also, because if you look at it, so India, apart from in occupied Jammu and Kashmir, there are over 12, over 1 dozen insurgencies which are taking place in India. And their dissidents, because they run for their lives, so they take shelter elsewhere in the world. So they have been there. So India has been keeping a tab on that, and where opportunity arises, they do that. And at times their operatives are caught. Yes, Sajad.
Right. Let me go to Ali Sultan here. Ali, is there any remedy under law? I mean, the German law obviously thought that this was a punishable offense. But in terms of the fact, as I said in my opening, that all of these cases can be traced back to the Indian consulate in Frankfurt. So what kind of remedy, if at all? I mean, you've got these conventions on diplomatic and consulate, immunities and the rest of it. So what exactly are we looking at?
Before we come to the remedies, I think it's important for us to understand how exactly this Indian misconduct, out of the Frankfurt Consulate General violates international law, because it is a violation of the United Nations Charter, which is why Germany has taken this very seriously and pursued this criminal prosecution in their courts. And very specifically, it's a violation of German sovereignty because India is clandestinely trying to invade German sovereign space through these actions. So it's a clear violation of the United Nations Charter, Article 2, Paragraph 1, which ensures that all states enjoy sovereign equality under international law. It's also a violation of German territorial sovereignty and integrity through these Indian actions. So that's the first violation under international law. Now, this is also a violation of European Union law and international law on human rights, because through these actions, those Indian nationals who were being surveyed, who were being spied upon, their right of privacy, which the Germans have to ensure under both International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights as well as the European Convention on Human Rights, that has also been violated. So that's the second string of violation involved here. And now thirdly, of course, you cannot use these consulates to engage in such clandestine operations on foreign soil. Just recently, if you recall, the United States asked China to shut down its consulate in Houston because it was suspected of engaging in espionage activities. So this is something which is taken very seriously by law-abiding nations. Now, India, of course, is not a state today, at least today's manifestation of India is definitely roguish in its orientation and not a state which is respectful of international law, but you can't say that about Germany. Germany takes these things very seriously, which is why they've been pursuing this, and there is a system, a pattern behind this. As you mentioned in your introduction, this is the fourth such conviction, and this Indian misconduct, espionage activities being carried out through their consulates. We've been saying that in the context of our Western neighbor for years. So I hope that the world will take our assertions more seriously now, because I would like to see this not as an isolated incident of Indian misconduct, but a definite pattern behind this. So those are some of international law as well as European law violations. Now, in terms of remedy, already, espionage cases usually are tried under the domestic laws of respective jurisdictions, which is exactly what has happened in this case. And that's why we see that the German prosecutors have taken this upon themselves to pursue this case in German courts and get a conviction, which is what has happened here.
I'll return to you, but let me go back to Ambassador Durrani here. Ambassador Durrani, Sultan has mentioned one case which is very interesting, and that's the Chinese consulate in Houston, which was shut down by the US government. So clearly, the host country can take such a measure if it is convinced that the consulate is involved in activities that are prejudicial to diplomatic norms.
I think we have to make some distinction between political decision-making and actually legal remedies offered. So in this case, in this particular German case, I'm still wondering as to what action German government has taken against the consulate. Have they asked the Indian government to withdraw their particular handler who in fact was handling this gentleman? So in that case, then German government must have declared persona non grata to that particular Indian operative who was posted in the Indian consulate in Frankfurt. So as regards American action in Houston, that was political because they didn't prove anything. So there are certain political decisions which are taken. Of course, governments know that a sending state has sent whether that particular official is from their foreign service or from their intelligence services. So I think governments know. We know it for sure, and so I think others also know. So in that case, I think a slight distinction has to be made. That's why the China then in retaliation had to declare American diplomats persona non grata, and they were also sent back. So there are certain tit-for-tat actions in the espionage world, And then the one which you have seen in Germany. In this Frankfurt case, I think those persons were of German nationality. They had the German nationality. So in that respect, then Indian consulates used those persons. Of course, they were of Indian origin, and they were doing espionage on the persons of Indian origin who live in Germany. So that is so in that respect, I think maybe German government may have had some lenient view, but I'm sure they must have declared Indian operatives persona non grata. Otherwise, from prosecution point of view, I think their court may not have taken any decision without having evidence in hand. Yes, it does.
Right. Thank you. That was Ambassador Asif Durrani speaking with us. Before I wrap up, let me go back to Ali Sultan. Ali, there have been complaints by Kashmiri activists and also foreign nationals living in Europe or in North America who support the Kashmir cause and who actively participate in propagating the plight of the Kashmiris. There have been complaints of this kind of spying. There have been complaints of threats. There have been complaints of people exposing their home addresses and the rest of it. So it creates a very Pinterest kind of menacing atmosphere for activists. Is there some remedy for that also?
Look, as I said, I mean, espionage per se is not a crime under international law. That would surprise perhaps some people because criminal offenses in international law are very restricted. So you have to go to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. You have to commit crimes such as genocide, grave war crimes for international criminal conduct to arise. But nevertheless, all of these are violations of domestic criminal laws, which is what has happened in this case. So there are countries like Canada, for instance, and Germany, who are much more proactive in going after, Indian misconduct. But at the end of the day, of course, politics comes in the way. So you can't perhaps expect every country, especially those who have alliances with India, to take this as seriously as they should. But states which are responsible, states which are law-abiding, will not accept this behavior on their soil because this is a clear trespass into their sovereign space.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ali Sultan, speaking with us. This is all from In Focus tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.